Many people have been looking at alternatives to Twitter/X, and there are three prominent platforms that keep popping up over the past couple of years. There is Threads, there's Mastodon, and there is Bluesky. I've been off of Twitter/X for the better part of a year, and I've actually been playing with each of these platforms, and they each have their own pros and cons, and there's a plethora of tools that I've been using to manage them, so I wanted to talk about all of these. So the little backstory right now is that Twitter/X has been going through various things, and there isn't one specific thing a lot of people can really pin down. Some will say that is the straw that broke the camel's back. Most recently, as of making this video, the recent terms of service change is allowing them to use your imagery and content to train their AI. So a lot of people who do creative works were really irked by that, and they've been seeing to jump ship to Mastodon, Threads, or Bluesky for one reason or another, or trying all three, or a various combination of them. I have figured out, over using these platforms for the better part of a year, different tools that have helped me get some success on there. In fact, on Mastodon, I have more followers and engagement there than I ever did on Twitter. And it's a very effective way for me to actually find new followers to get onto my Twitch streams. And there's different tools that I will be talking about, the pros and cons of these platforms, and a couple of tools I've actually developed and will be enhancing some more features for over time. So before we dive into that, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to see more of my content, and check out all of my socials below, which of course include Threads, Bluesky, and Mastodon. So as I mentioned a little bit earlier, there are some terms of service changes coming to Twitter/X that is going to allow your imagery as well as content to be used to train their AI. Of course, a lot of people who are creative content creators, seems a little bit redundant there, but they are really irked at this idea of basically having their content taken. That's stand-up comedians, artists of all various kinds of nature. But also, they're going to be changing the blocking functionality, which I've talked about in another video, where it's not really going to be a block where we more commonly know it, which is I'm not going to see you anymore and you can't see me. It's now more of a mute, so you can't really respond to their things anymore. You can still see their content, which really makes me wonder if Elon Musk has been blocked so much that it's lessening his Twitter experience, that he's like, you know what, we're just going to change this all entirely, instead of just adding a mute functionality, which is actually an additional feature that Mastodon, Threads, and Bluesky all have, although there's various nuances to how Bluesky versus the federated platforms of Threads and Mastodon act with it. We'll get into that in a little bit. And everyone has their own reason why they're starting to leave Twitter/X and checking out these other platforms. For me personally, I was doing some development on some Python projects that I was using to do some education, and it was a huge fight with Twitter to get my API access, then keep my API access, and they kept giving it, yanking it, giving it, yanking it, and eventually I just said, you know what, it's not even worth the effort. This is a fun open source project, but it's still used today, and I will be talking about, because I think it's very helpful to some of you Twitch streamers out there, especially if you're on Mastodon. We'll get to that in a little bit in that own section, but needless to say, there are many reasons why a lot of people are starting to flock to Bluesky, Threads, and Mastodon, and everyone has their own reasons, but I'm going to talk about the pros and cons for each platform. So I want to make this very clear. I'm not going to get into the ideological reasons to switch. I'm going to talk about the platforms themselves, because everyone has their different point where the straw broke the camel's back. But I do want to mention on the ideological front there that there's a misconception that people believe that Bluesky, Mastodon, Threads, and even Nostr, which we're not going to really talk about in this video, use blockchain or cryptocurrency technology. None of the things we're talking about involve cryptocurrency, blockchain, or NFTs. I do have a separate video I want to talk about how blockchain and cryptocurrency doesn't belong everywhere and social networks being there, but this isn't that video. Expect that to come out in the near future. Needless to say, let's talk about the different platforms, the tools that I use, the pros and cons of each platform. Let's start, of course, with Mastodon. I've actually talked about Mastodon quite a bit in a prior video when I talk about the history of social media and the entirety of the Fediverse, because Mastodon is really just a part of this whole thing called the Fediverse. And what that is a federated, decentralized system of different applications that all can talk to each other. Predominantly, they are using the protocol known as ActivityPub. So there is no singular Mastodon instance. There's this decentralized network of servers that all talk to each other, and then each server can have their own rules, as well as if they like some servers or not. So imagine you have a toxic server, you can moderate these in different ways. It's a really fascinating idea because there's, well, tens tens of thousands of different servers on the Fediverse right now. And they're not just Mastodon. You've also got this thing called PeerTube. You've got this thing called Lemmy. And Threads is also part of the Fediverse, which we will talk about in a little bit when we focus specifically on that. But with Mastodon, you can actually go follow and like some posts on Threads right now, although there are some limitations because they're building it out. We'll get more into the specifics and limitations with Threads in a little bit when we get to that section, but it's kind of hard to not mention this without mentioning that Threads is part of this whole thing. There is really no AI for algorithmic discovery. It is more chronological focused, as well as it's based on if you've interacted with that server before. I'm oversimplifying things a little bit to give a high-level view. You can kind of think of it as like email. Once you're on one server, you can still email everyone else just because you're not part of that one server. So you can see things on your local Mastodon instance, which is the other word that they use for a server, or you can actually interact with a lot of people. Hashtags, very powerful for discovery. You also may have to kind of get to know through these different lists, like there's community trunks and things like that, to find people of different interests. There's also Fedi.directory, as well as you can go check the public and explore pages on different servers to find more users that may be interesting on different servers that you've stumbled across. There's a total of about 12 million users right now in the whole of the Fediverse, and Mastodon is roughly 2/3 of all of the users right there. And it's also important to know that Mastodon itself is a non-profit. Apparently, they've also actively turned down venture capital money. They want to keep this an open source and non-profit project. Now, Mastodon.social, the official, hosted server by the Mastodon Foundation, is of course the largest server. I believe they have somewhere around like 2 million users on there. But you can go and host your own server, have it federated with a lot of different people. As I run my own Mastodon server and have been doing so for a couple of years, I actually originally started on another server, then I migrated my profile. So that is one advantage that you have, is that you're not beholden to staying in this one silo here. If you don't like how that one server operates, you can then take your profile and export it. And that is actually a feature Threads has also been talking about that they will have. Again, we'll get into the specifics of Threads in a little bit. It's again hard to mention ActivityPub and the whole of the Fediverse and how this operates without touching on Threads once in a while. You have a lot of more control with you as a user. You can individually block and mute users and entire domains. So if your server's okay with one server, then you can actually go ahead and mute that entire server or the users thereof. And of course, you can report it to your moderation and things like that. Now, I do notice that Mastodon and the Fediverse as a whole seems to be a little bit more popular in Europe than America. And of course, one thing I personally have noticed, because I'm more in the information security and cybersecurity space, is that a lot of my field tends to be more on Mastodon than the other platforms. We'll get more into that in a little bit as well. So now let's get into the pros and cons of Mastodon before we move on to Threads and Bluesky. I've written a list out here. I've been doing some, nice thinking about this. So with the pros of Mastodon, you get extremely high engagement. By far, Mastodon is my most popular platform in microblogging. I have about twice the followers on my Mastodon than I ever did on Twitter, and the engagement is ridiculous. I literally am seeing a lot of people find my Twitch streams within the same Twitch stream from a post on Mastodon with a tool that I've made, which we'll talk about later, and I'm getting a good amount of discovery for my Twitch streams and other content through Mastodon. Compared to Bluesky, Threads, and all of my other platforms, including TikTok, where I have 373,000 people following me. That is just absolutely mind-blowing to me, that a platform that only has a couple thousand followers on it is giving me more traction on my YouTube and my Twitch than my own TikTok is. The other thing is that you, of course, have more user control over the blocks, the mutes, not just of, individual people, but the servers as well, like I mentioned before. So if your moderation is saying, hey, this server's okay, and you're like, they just don't jive with me, then you can have that control as well. There's a little bit more ownership of data as well. There is no centralized control. So you actually own your own data, and if you don't like what this one server is doing, you can then export your data and move it to another server. It won't take your posts with you, but it'll take your following and followers with you, and then send a redirect as well. Now, I should add a little note there. That is provided you didn't do anything to piss off the server admin enough that they disabled your account before you could do that. So you still have to be on your best behavior. Just like anything, don't be a dick. That's the golden rule, I think, everywhere. You know, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, be excellent to each other. The other thing is that it feels more organic. And moderation is managed by individual servers. So you can find servers that jive more with how you want things to be moderated. And if you don't like the server, you can then switch over. Or even if you don't like that, you can pull the bender and say, screw you guys, I'm going to make my own theme park with blackjack and hookers. And that's kind of what I did with my own server, because I didn't like that there was, with the, you know, scuttlebutt of Meta coming out with threads, we'll get more into this specific part of it, but it's worth mentioning, that a lot of people don't really care for Meta and started preemptively blocking threads and their ability to federate with servers. I wanted the ability to have that control for what I can see. Now, ActivityPub also supports interaction across apps like PeerTube, Lemmy, and Misky, so you have an entire ecosystem out there. And as more things support ActivityPub, you can then follow people across different apps. So WordPress, for example, despite all the, you know, drama going on, and I've talked about that a little bit, if someone enables ActivityPub, which is an official feature, you can have a plugin actually add, you can start following that WordPress server to see the post there, or any other content management system or website that just decides to add the ActivityPub protocol. Decentralization limits the risks of outages. So basically, only one server goes down at a time. So let's say Mastodon.social has the issues like they did when they were having their growth numbers. It didn't affect the rest of the Fediverse. It just happened to be, okay, I wasn't seeing some posts from this server. I can keep on chugging. If one server decides to go down, my server is unaffected unless it affects my server. It is, you know, to be worth said that we'll get into this in the cons in a little bit. There is a little bit of a downside with that nature as well. It is also a mature platform with strong professional communities, especially in web development and information security. If you are a very technical person, this is probably going to be the ecosystem and environment you're going to want to find yourself in, because you can rub shoulders with a lot of professionals and a lot of information around there that is relevant to your field. Now, I'm seeing that pick up on other platforms, but Mastodon, from my experience, is where a lot of the InfoSec community started jumping to from Twitter/X when the InfoSec Twitter started dying because of the API access being pulled and a lot of our automated tools to cover CVEs and all that just started to go bye-bye. You also have the ability to run your own server and customize it, including character limits. So Mastodon by default has a 500 character limit per post. You can modify that optionally if you run your own server. And there's servers, I think, like infosec.exchange allows for like 4,000 characters, which, by the way, if you do want to join the Fediverse, infosec.exchange and hackyderm.io are two of the very popular servers in the infosec space I recommend going to. Of course, there is also defcon.social, the one run by the actual DEFCON large hacker convention, and I've seen them advertise at the last two DEFCONs I've been there as well. Of course, you can go to mastodon.social, the biggest one of them all, but I would recommend checking out some smaller servers as well so we can distribute the load, and you may actually find the local feeds there a little bit more interesting and akin to your liking of things. And it's also good to note that mastodon.social, they, as being the official server, are kind of like the beta test for everything else coming on Mastodon, because they're always running on a nightly build, so you may come into like weird wonky features potentially or things like that, but eventually it trickles out to the rest of us. Now, you also have easy domain verification via TXT records. So you know that blue check mark that you had on Twitter and everything like that? Yeah, you can easily verify if you are legit if you own a domain. For example, if you go check mine, you can actually see with a TXT record that I actually wrote into my domain registrar, I can verify that I am the legitimate person there. Now, Bluesky also does have the ability for domain verification there, but there's a little bit of a difference between how they operate and some caveats that we'll get into when we talk about them. There are plenty of managed hosts as well for easy, affordable server hosting. So if you're not a super technical person, you can actually go to, managed hosts. Like there's a few out there. One of the most predominant ones is Masto.host. And you can actually pay a few dollars per month and they can manage all of the complex hosting, the content delivery networks, and all of that for you. Of course, you are going to have to manage the resources and everything, which we'll get into in the con side of things. So you don't have to be super technical. You can host it off a Raspberry Pi in your own house. You can host it off a big, powerful server, but you are at your own discretion. Do you want to have someone else host it and manage it, or join your buddy's server. Like, I run my server with a few dozen people that, want to join and be hosted with me, even though I am probably the worst moderator ever. I mean, I don't know how they can stand this moderator. He's horrible. Of course, it's me running things. It's more because I have the rule of don't make me moderate you. Otherwise, if I have to put pants on, you ain't gonna like me. One great thing about Mastodon is there's no ads. No ads whatsoever that I've seen, other than businesses that are posting things related to their business from their platform. It's more of an interesting way because rather than advertising per se, they're interacting with them. It's a nice little approach to things rather than just you get an ad that is irrelevant to you promoting some cryptocurrency or some BS thing like Twitter/X has had. Now, in terms of the cons, moderation and support vary by server. So this is a pro and a con. It's not like, you're going to be a one-size-fits-all. It's going to be more, do you like how this server is doing things? You can give feedback to them. Now, depending on if the server administrator and moderation team are kind of dicks or, not doing their work, your results may vary. Now, this is why some people make their own servers and they choose to moderate, and then you can also defederate from different servers as well, as I've mentioned a little bit before. So if you find toxic servers, or in the case of the unfortunate thing that happens once in a while, you'll come across things with CSAM. Here's the reality. If it's on the internet, you're going to find those nasty kind of people anywhere. It's the unfortunate nature of just the internet. We can, at least get that information, report it. But there is also different services like IFTAS that are coming out there to develop tools for block lists that allow you to distribute, if different servers are starting to block different things, so we can now communally have a list based on agreed upon rules. And of course, Mastodon is going to have official block listing capabilities, very similar to firewalls and stuff that I'll be talking about in a future PF Sense video, so that you can subscribe to if you don't want to see certain kinds of content. So if you like the meme of not on my Christian Minecraft server, it can be not on my Christian Mastodon server. I'm not Christian, I just find that meme funny. The learning curve, so there are a few more steps to Mastodon because a lot of people are used to, I'm just going to sign up to the app and then I'm going to have my username and I'm there, like TikTok and Twitter and, Facebook and name a platform. There are a few extra steps because you first have to pick the server that you want to home yourself on, as I've mentioned before. So you can go to mastodon.social, you can make your own server, you can find one of the many servers out there. There's a lot of variation there, and there are sites out there to help you pick your first server, but of course that is an additional step that most other platforms don't have. I do think that there's a little bit of a learning curve as well, that insofar as using it with understanding how federation works and all of that, but I do see it being worth for most users. Now, Threads is hoping to lessen that curve a little bit. We'll get into that in a little bit. The other thing is that the server hosting costs resources. You can have a cost affixed to it in terms of monetary, if you're hosting it on like AWS or Cloudflare. I know some people are going to watch this video and be like, don't do that. Yeah, there is kind of you're going to find the weird oddities of people that are like, I don't like that this server is hosted on Cloudflare, so we're not going to federate with it just for that reason. Or we don't support AWS ethically, and we're not going to do it for that reason. I think that's a little bit too puritanical in my honest opinion. Hey there, Editing Chief Geek 3D. I just wanted to give an example of how weird some of these Karens can be on social media. Now, this isn't specific to Mastodon, but this happened on Mastodon, where somebody actually reported my own comment on my own server for talking about how I wanted to use LLMs with my own content as a discussion of or participation in using plagiarism machines for personal gain is bannable. It's my content. Who's plagiarizing what? That's just an example of how weird I think some people can be with their rules on their different servers. But anyway, needless to say, you can host it out of your own house. The resources there for having a server, and as the more popular that server becomes, the more resources it's going to need, because when it's federating and interacting with the more servers that are federated, it's going to have to do more connections at a time. So there is, of course, a issue there if you are administrating it yourself. So a lot of these servers do take donations to operate their server costs. So be kind to your server administration team and maybe consider, pitching in a few bucks. If, you're already paying for Twitter/X, it's not really that much, different, pay a few bucks so that they can have the hosting costs operate. Now, there is an issue also with spam attacks that, are going on here and there with Mastodon. It's been lessening. There's been more additional features there with HCAPTCHA and all that, but that more has to do with the issue of the servers that are not being administrated and maintained by the servers. So what happens is these zombie servers, just eventually somebody goes and makes a script to do some script kiddie things, logs in, and then just starts blasting spam and everything like that. But we now have more federated tools out there like the IFTOS blocking system that actually looks at these different servers going on and then shares the block lists out with everybody else. Plus, you can always check out the FediBlock and FediBlock meta hashtags to see what the other server admins are saying with why they're blocking different things. Federation also limits who can see you, depending on the goals of the server. So there are servers, like I mentioned, that are outright blocking AWS, Cloudflare, or Meta's threads because of ideological reasons. You can also, be not as popular of a server, so you're gonna have to depend on relays, which infosec.exchange is a nice relay to connect a lot of the cybersecurity community together. Hey there, it's post-recording, middle of editing, Chief Geek 3D here. I forgot to mention about pluggable Fediverse discovery providers, which is another thing that's gonna be coming out. It's not out right now, but that initiative has been announced, and that is going to be something that is going to allow you to plug in to different providers so that you can be discovered more and discover new things. I'll talk about that when that feature is released, but that is something at least worthwhile to know right now for smaller servers when we were talking about relays and everything. Anyway, overall, I still find it worth it because it's kind of like, think of it as like your friend group. So imagine you have this group over here, and then you have this group over here. Well, not everyone in this circle is going to know everyone in this circle, but then you have this circle over here that's going to know more people in this little area here. That's my little con that I really see with it, but depending on how you approach it, if you want to be smaller and more intimate, it is a good thing. Now, there are some inefficiencies in handling growth. So it operates with a system called Sidekick. There are, issues being brought up of how is this going to scale over time as servers get more and more federated. I know my server is a little bit more powerful because, well, my database is kind of growing a little bit large from all the connections that I've had and posts, and I had about a dozen relays at one point connected to it, and I've reduced it to 2. But there are promising future improvements in ways of discovery searching and other ideas around like CDNs and things like that. So that'll be really interesting to discuss. But I think federation is a great concept that I think the whole idea of the Fediverse should be explored by more people, and we'll talk about how Meta is now taking their approach on it with. But first, we're going to take a little bit of a break and talk about how you can increase your privacy with Proton, the company that believes that privacy should not only be the default setting, but an inherent right to everyone. They have an encrypted at rest email, drive storage, calendar, and many more features like a VPN, a password manager, and more. Check them out with the links below. Meta's Threads, by far the largest of the 3 platforms that we will be discussing, and it also has ActivityPub enabled, so it is basically part of the Fediverse, although there's a little asterisk next to it because you have to optionally enable it on your account. So if you're wondering right now, what is that Fediverse thing? Just enable it. So basically what that means is that I can see your account from Mastodon or Lemmy or Bluesky or anything if I'm federated with threads.net. Now, as I discussed a little bit earlier, not everyone is ideologically in favor of Meta coming to the party, so they may defederate from them. So if your server is federated with threads, you can see posts that are coming from those accounts potentially. So for example, I go on my Mastodon and I can see people from threads, and there's some news sites and things like that that I will follow from there, and I'd rather follow them from Mastodon than I would from threads because there's some weirdness with threads that it doesn't make me too happy with, besides the fact that it's Meta running things. They started getting their large user base because they pulled all their users from Instagram, so it's kind of associated with Instagram. Adam Mosseri, the guy that ran Instagram, is the guy heading up threads. So you can actually see Adam Mosseri, Zuckerberg, and all those from Mastodon. But the issue that they have is that the federation capability is still kind of in beta because it really just feels like threads, and Bluesky does this too, we'll talk about it a little bit, kind of just released their platform to capitalize on the downfall of Twitter/X because they saw a lot of people were going to Mastodon willing to go there. So they're like, let's just get this out to the public right now and then we will test and prod. That's kind of what it feels like. So the issue is that if I post from Mastodon and see a reply to like somebody on threads, they can't see that I've replied. Hey there, it's post-recording, middle of editing, Chief Geek 3D over here. So I did actually see that there was an update to threads while I was making this video that you actually can see replies from the Fediverse now. They show up in their own little section underneath the posts if you have any of them. So you actually can see Fediverse replies, but it's kind of weird that they're kind of hiding them and putting them off to the side, which is a little bit dissatisfying. I would rather see all of my replies in line and then just see, you know, the actual name and everything they came from, just like any other reply. But let's get back to the video. But they can now see my likes. They can see that I'm following them from the Fediverse. That's been added, but there's no interaction between the two platforms right now in full. That is still being developed right now. And Threads doesn't have direct messaging as well, which is another reason why if I direct message you from Mastodon, you can't see it on Threads. And you can't message me. You can't actually interact with anything on Mastodon or any of the Fediverse yet. All you can do is have them like and follow you. That's it. Meta definitely has to do some development there. And the federation capability is optional, but you should do it. It allows you more exposure into the Mastodon and, you know, whole federated space that is, again, if they didn't defederate from threads.net for ideological reasons or whatever. It uses AI to curate some posts by interest, although I have to put a big asterisk on that, and a lot of it seems to be around the engagement bait. I'll talk about that in a little bit when we get to the cons. Meta is also promising future portability of accounts to other Fediverse platforms, which is one of the reasons why I parked mine on Threads, is the idea that hopefully I can export my entire profile on Threads into my Mastodon server and then just live on there, because I kind of don't want my stuff owned by Meta. With that being said, there are some pros for Threads. There is a large user base with 190 million monthly active users last I checked. There is good engagement due to Meta's AI algorithm. You will get quite a bit of engagement on there, even for smaller accounts, way more than I had on Twitter/X. That's actually seeming to be a common trend amongst all three of these platforms to varying degrees compared to when I was on Twitter/X. The Fediverse integration is growing, with some Mastodon account, you know, being able to access them again if your server's allowing that federation. The cons here are it feels incomplete and rushed to capitalize on Twitter's decline. It feels like they just released this product before it was completely ready, just saying, oh, Twitter/X is declining, people are trying to jump ship, let's capture those users before we miss this moment here. And that's again something that seems to be the overall trending theme with Bluesky as well too, just in my honest opinion and my perspective here. There's no direct messaging. That's a big swing and a miss there, buddy. Although some people would say that's a good thing, because apparently Instagram is known for, like, lots of people sliding in and being really creepy and all that, but you still need direct messaging. I think you should have control around what you can do with that and everything. But, you know, the Federation isn't fully built out. You can't explore the Fediverse fully, so you're not really getting all the best world of the Fediverse from there. You're kind of just getting people to follow you, but you can't really do anything back. Engagement bait is absolutely rampant, and it's repetitive. Meta has even accepted this as a problem and trying to get AI to curate things a little bit better, but it seems to also be hammering people a little bit hard on that, which then goes into the other issue I had, which is heavy-handed moderation and lack of user support, which that's kind of par for the course for Meta. I mean, how many people do you know get locked out of their Facebook or have issues with their Facebook or their Instagram, and then you can't do anything to get a hold of Meta? Then the moderation can be kind of weird. Like, there was actually an example one time where Meta hit me hard because I responded to a Winamp post somebody had made, and I just said, I'm here to whip the llama's ass. Now, for those of you that don't know, that was Winamp's own original tagline, and, you know, their little motto and phrase they used to say all the time to promote their product.
Winamp. It really whips the llama's ass.
So I was actually doing something in the course that was, you know, okay. But they were like, that is, you know, aggressive or something like that. And they didn't give me a strike, but it's just kind of weird that their moderation called me out for that, when, given the context, it shouldn't have been bad. Hello again, it's Editing Chief Geeked over here. So Meta actually had another incident after I recorded the bulk of these videos that I wanted to talk about to showcase how erratic, unresponsive, and not helpful their support can really be, especially when it comes to moderation. So a famous individual, Jack Sweeney, is known for making a lot of these celebrity jet tracking accounts. You may have known him from the Elon Jet Tracker over on Twitter that famously got booted. He, of course, took his project, put it on Threads and Mastodon and Bluesky, and a year after it's been on Threads, all of a sudden they took down the Taylor Swift Jet Tracker as well as the Elon Musk one, and apparently all the rest of them there. So he's been trying to figure out what he violated, what, you know, issue is going on, and they haven't been helpful as of this video right now. He's still on Mastodon with it. He's still on Bluesky with this stuff, but we're going to get to that in a little bit because he did make a little blurb about Bluesky moderation, which will be better talked about later on, so expect me to pop up again. But yeah, Meta's moderation can kind of be really hit or miss and not very helpful. So, with that being said, let's get back to the video. And it's all centralized. Users don't own their own data. That is a problem, especially given Twitter/X, but hopefully if they allow portability, that will change quite a bit. Now it's time to talk about the third platform, which I feel like a lot more people are having interest in right now, which is Bluesky. But before we dive into Bluesky, let's take a moment here to give a break and talk about how you all can level up your coding skills with Codecrafters is an amazing platform for you to hone and improve your software development skills, allowing you to have challenges in all sorts of programming languages to build your own Redis server, build your own HTTP server, build your own interpreter, or, even build your own Git. You can basically remake a lot of popular projects out there running all sorts of languages. Just looking at this list here, they have Rust, Go, Python, C, C#, C++, Clojure, Crystal, Dart, Elixir, and the list goes on from there. So check out Codecrafters today in the link below and go and hone your software development skills. I know I'm going to be tinkering with them myself quite a bit. Now, I've been in Bluesky since the invite-only days. I think I was one of the first 50,000 people there. That was back when it felt like you were shouting into a cave, just going, hello? Hello? Anybody hear me? Originally, it started as a project under Twitter with Jack Dorsey, but now it's a separate project in and of their own right. So it is developed on the AT protocol. It's designed to be a decentralized social media platform, but it's not compatible with ActivityPub. So it's isolated from Mastodon, Threads, and etc. And they're hoping to have their own entire ecosystem with AT protocol, similar to how the Fediverse already has right now, but they're gonna have to make all this stuff from scratch. Now, there are some, interesting projects I've seen come out using AT Proto that are still in development and their own right and everything like that. They have an AI algorithm and a comfortable moderation system. It gives you a little bit more power than Twitter does, but there's also been people that have been complaining that they've been getting kicked off of Bluesky as soon as they register their name and everything. I can only tell you what I've seen looking at the other platforms. Like I've said, I've been playing with these for a while. Hey there, it's Editing Chief Geek. I'm gonna be popping up a few more times, I told you. Anyway, I forgot to include some information that when you're banned from Bluesky, you're not really banned from Bluesky. It's not a centralized service like Threads or TikTok or Twitter or something like that. You just happen to be banned from that personal data server. So you have to understand that Bluesky with AT protocol is split into 3 different functions: personal data server, relay, and app views. This is different than ActivityPub when it comes to Mastodon and the Fediverse, where all the components to decentralize a server happen to be on each individual server. AT protocol splits this up. So your personal data server is what hosts all your data. So when you're logging in, you're logging into that PDS. Now, it just so happens most people, including myself as of this video, are logging into bsky.app. I plan to make my own PDS. You can make your own PDS, and then it can connect to all the relays, and you get all the, advantage of everything there. The way it functions, basically, is you have a relay that does a lot of the big networking that, it takes a lot of throughput, basically, because there's a lot of data it's processing and everything. And the app views are what help you curate the feed to how you want to see things. You can subscribe to different lists and, moderation and all of that. And that's where a lot of this magic really happens, is inside these app views. So with that being said, just understand, you're not being banned from Bluesky. You're being banned from that PDS. You can always find another PDS. It just so happens right now, the only real PDS that people can log into is bsky.app, whereas to opposed Mastodon, there's a few thousand servers right now because it's a bit more mature and well-known that you can go just log into another server. You can verify your username by linking it to a domain, so you can get the domain name verification, similar to Mastodon, to prove that, you are legitimate and you are, tied to this property. However, it's very important to note that domain-based verification on Mastodon and Bluesky work completely differently. On Mastodon, you are proving your association with the website no matter what your username on any Mastodon server is. Whereas on Bluesky, when you do domain-based verification, that becomes your username. I'm sure Editing Me is going to pop up here in a little bit to give you some more information about all of that. And it has around 12 million users as of right now making this post, with a decent monthly active user count. But you can also subscribe to feeds and starter packs to get your experience rolling. I recently made my first starter pack, which is basically, people can go and, see be, people to follow and feeds to check out. So you can customize your home feed and all that a little bit more. So you can have a little bit more curation power around it. Now, the pros for this is that you definitely do get better engagement than Twitter/X. There is a little bit easier onboarding than Mastodon. There is a con to that I will explain in a little bit. There's also no ads at the moment. That seems to be a great thing. And moderation is better than Twitter/X. I will definitely vouch for that. It allows for domain name-based verification, but, there's, again, a little bit of con with that. I do have to say that Bluesky has some nice features with it. We'll talk about my overall thoughts in a little bit between these three platforms. However, the cons are it's not compatible with the Fediverse, so it lacks the existing ecosystem right now. Potentially speaking, Bluesky could add ActivityPub integration, but that would be additional resources, maintenance, and all that stuff. It's a possibility, but it's not, from my understanding, in their roadmap. There is no post-editing feature, which is one thing that's kind of weird because Threads, at least now, as of this post, allows you to edit a post within 15 minutes of its original creation, and Mastodon allows you to edit the post whenever, and then if you edit the post on Mastodon, we'll just alert everybody that, has interacted with it, that, you have edited your post. Domain-based verification, while handy, can cause broken message threads as any pointers to current username may likely stop working. It's editing me again. So originally I made this section thinking that the domain-based verification came with the con that prior messages and threads would break as you changed your username. Turns out it's not the case there. There were a lot of tech people in Bluesky that were under this misconception, but as we were conversing, we were digging up documentation. We found out that actually you get a unique profile ID that moves around with you, so that's not the case. However, there is a problem with domain-based verification in the way that Bluesky operates, which is, for example, think of like email. You have bob@yourcompanyname.com. Well, you can't claim the domain name as yourself if the organization has that. You could become bob.yourcompanyname.com, but that becomes unwieldy and not really scaling well because HR and IT has to have tight integration on who's joining and leaving the company. Now, there is a tool that I was made aware of that I have just started playing with. I can't talk too much about. It's still in testing as well, called aviary.domains, that is supposed to remedy this issue, but it's still something that has to be considered and managed as users, especially employees, want to get verified on the app, because it's not like you go to Twitter that you can just get, authorized as you are verified and stuff like that. It's a whole different ballgame when it comes to domain-based verification because there is not really a central authority in decentralized systems. The 300 character limit, that needs to increase on Bluesky. That is ridiculous. 300 characters is not enough. Threads and Mastodon at least allow 500 characters, and I'm feeling like when I'm doing my cross post, which we'll be talking about the tools in a little bit that I use for that, I have to consistently cut or modify messages just to be for Bluesky and break them into multiple messages. We're way past the days of SMS where we limited to 140 characters, which, if you're not familiar, that is the reason why Twitter originally had the 140 character limit, was we were literally texting through SMS. We should move beyond that. Nobody's really doing text-based things. 500 characters seems to be a good amount of space for you to get a good idea out there, especially if you're attaching links and, doing hashtags. But hashtags don't seem to be as effective as, like, Mastodon is. And Threads, by the way, you can only do one hashtag. Take that what you will with it. There is a PDS server, personal data server, which allows you to host your own data for Bluesky, but it requires more technical knowledge. I know they're trying to make this a little bit easier, whereas like Mastodon, because it's a little bit more mature, you can actually have it hosted by other people, and there's managed hosts out there if you don't feel like setting up the CDN and everything like that yourself, or hosting it in your basement, but you can do the PDS server yourself. The resources don't seem to be that intense, but not only does it require more technical knowledge, it doesn't feel as decentralized as Mastodon, because a lot of it's still going to have to feed through a lot of Bluesky's own feeds and relays and all of that stuff. I hope that changes more over time, because it still feels like the platform relies heavily on Bluesky infrastructure. And it's not as decentralized as Mastodon, so we're still kind of beholden to how Bluesky does things, at least in my perspective here. I'm hoping that changes over time. The other thing that's interesting is that public blocks show who is blocking whom. And I don't think public, that should be public. I don't think blocks are information that should be publicized. And this can be used to harass other people, things like that, potentially, in my personal perspective. I just don't think that's, a great idea. Another issue I found in terms of the API, moving on from blocking while I was in the middle of editing this, is apparently you can also backdate posts. So there's a huge potential for misinformation. Yeah, there's a great way to have some fun with this, but I don't think you should easily be able to create posts looking like it actually was back in this date. Like I said, a lot of potential for misinformation. When it comes to multi-factor authentication, or also known as two-factor authentication, or 2FA, myself and many other cybersecurity experts have a complaint that Bluesky only allows you to conduct this through email. Email is an insecure way to do your multi-factor authentication, just like SMS MFA is insecure. We recommend, at minimum in this day and age, to be using app-based timed one-time passcodes, TOTP, those rolling codes many of you use a little generator app to actually create those MFA codes. That's seen as the bare minimum. All the other applications I've mentioned use it. Most other applications you're probably using are using them. But the gold standard as well is FIDO WebAuthn. These little YubiKey security keys are the most prominent ones. Twitter/X as well as Mastodon do support these. Threads does not either. And of course, neither does Bluesky. I hope that's one thing that does change. The other elephant in the room here is that it is a for-profit company, meaning eventual monetization is likely raising long-term concerns. Because for those of you that don't know, Bluesky is run by a public benefit corporation. It's a for-profit entity. They did raise seed money so that they could, get a lot of the functionality and stuff like that operating. I know they've talked about some ideas with monetization, like selling domains and things like that, but I don't see how a lot of these ideas are going to scale. So the question then becomes, are they going to look at ads? Are they going to look at selling data? How are they going to monetize these things properly at scale? Because we have like 12 million users there right now. How is that going to scale over time? Now with Mastodon, yes, like I mentioned before, each server is reliant for their own hosting costs and things like that, but I think this is an overall question that needs to be addressed. It's editing me again, so a couple days after I'd recorded that video, they had announced new ideas for how they're going to monetize the entire services with a subscription model on developing features like higher quality video or profile customizations like colors and avatar frames. They do say that they plan on Bluesky remaining to be free to use, and that information and conversation should be easily accessible and not up-ranking paid accounts. However, this does raise the question with me, because this is a decentralized system with your public data servers, as I talked about before. Are they going to paywall some of those features so that you're going to have to pay to run it on your own server, or are they going to allow you to just run it on your own server, and then if you're on their server, you then have to pay for those features? So that's a question that I want to see answered. They also talked about how they raised their Series A fundraising of $15 million, which to me seemed on a little bit of the low side of things for a company of their size, which makes me wonder what their total evaluation of their company is. The other thing is that, as I said, they're a public benefit corporation, but I can't seem to find their charter anywhere. I tried looking for a while. It would be nice to have a little bit more transparency on that front from them. The other thing that came to mind is that Blockchain Capital is apparently one of the lead investors in things like that. They're known for cryptocurrency. They're saying that cryptocurrency and blockchains are not going to be involved, but I have to ask the question of, are they planning to do NFTs, things like that? I just don't think cryptocurrency has its place running social media. I think you can talk about cryptocurrency on social media, but I don't think it should run social media. I like cryptocurrency. I'll talk about that more in other videos, but I think it has its place, and I don't think it should be running everything. With that being said, Blockchain Capital is famous for losing about $6 million in a SIM swap after hardware wallets as well as multi-signature wallets had already been out for years. So this is a company that I don't think really has the best mindset when it comes to security or things like that. Maybe they learned their lessons. But anyway, that's my thoughts on the editing, and back to recording, Chief. Because I do want to see this project succeed. Do not get me wrong. I may have my complaints about each prospective project. There are some things where I'm like, I want to see how this is addressed. Only time will tell in the future, and I'm looking forward to it. But, Jack Dorsey did leave the project. He's no longer associated with it, citing concerns about repeating Twitter's mistakes in the past, and he even urged people to just go back to Twitter, which kind of, makes you go, because this is a guy that actually knows more about it. Now, from my understanding, Jack Dorsey just then kind of didn't just go to Twitter. He then went to Nostr, which I haven't really talked about, because Nostr, if you think Mastodon has a learning curve to start, try generating your own keys for that thing with Nostr and everything. Good idea and concept, but we'll get into that another day. It has a smaller professional and InfoSec community compared to Mastodon in my perspective, with tech and, IT, cybersecurity professionals. A lot of them seem to have made more of a home in Mastodon, which is, I guess, more of an issue for me. Not maybe for you, but I think it's something that's worthwhile to mention out there if that's something you're going to go. With that being said, now let's get into the tools that I use for managing my social media. So, having been away from Twitter/X for over a year, I've been using various tools and some that I've made myself so that I can actually post when I'm live on Twitch or cross-post to Threads, Bluesky, and Mastodon, and as well as, manage both Bluesky and Mastodon from the same app so I don't have to go into different apps all the time to reply and comment and all of that stuff. So I'm going to share with you the tips and tricks that I've actually been using for the past few months as well, and some ideas for you to find the people that you're following on Twitter before. First off, we'll start with the open source apps that I actually developed myself. The first one is called Twitch and Toot. For those of you not familiar, on Mastodon it's called a Toot, on Bluesky it's called a Skeet, and on Threads, I don't know what they call it. We just call it a post because they're boring. But anyway, with Twitch and Toot, you can actually run the file locally to monitor when your Twitch is going live and then post on the Mastodon. I plan to add Bluesky support to it and possibly Threads. You're more than welcome to contribute code to that open source project if you want. It's been running reliably on my Raspberry Pi for the better part of a year. Believe it or not, I actually get quite a few new followers that find my content through Mastodon. So I'm going to eventually make a YouTube version of it potentially as well. I first want to figure out how to get this working with Bluesky and then Dockerize it. But this code is up there, and of course, if you want to see this project or anything else that I'm mentioning, see the links down below in the description. The other thing I have is Star and Toot. If you like to follow what people are, maybe starring on GitHub, which is an open source repository where I host all of my projects to, you can actually see which projects I'm into, and you just have to, generate the API key from GitHub and then link it, and then it will post it onto Mastodon for you. And I'm again going to be adding Bluesky support for that one. I'm also looking again at Dockerizing that one. It's been a project that's been more for myself to learn how to interact with APIs, Python, as well as learning to Dockerize things. Although I might go with Rancher because there is a whole open source thing. I think that's the thing they're going with. Those are the two apps I use to manage a lot of things, because If This Then That used to do that for Twitter, but they didn't have Mastodon support, so I said, fine, I'll make it myself. Now, when it comes to cross-posting, there are two tools that I highly recommend, and these are actually ones that I am affiliated with, but I have been using these for the better part of a few weeks, and another one I actually found as well just a week ago or so. Both of them have their inherent strength. They are great if you're a business trying to cross-post across different accounts and don't have to deal with all the hassle of manually logging into an account and then doing the one thing. The first one that we'll talk about is Publer. Publer I've been using for quite a while. I actually, they got in touch with me back when I was on TikTok many months ago, and I played with it, but I was also primarily in Mastodon, so a cross-posting tool didn't really make much sense for me at the time. But then as Threads and Bluesky came out, I then saw the, value in a cross-posting tool, and you can schedule your posts. It has some AI capabilities for you to get some ideas and do things, so it's a really great tool for that. There is a free plan, but only allows you to connect 3 different accounts, so if you're just trying to do Threads, Mastodon, and Bluesky, definitely is a worthwhile addition there. They can also have it integrate with your WordPress, your YouTube, your TikTok, so it has a lot of capabilities in that regard as well. They have paid for plans that have a lot more capabilities too. The other application that I also recommend is called Fedica. Fedica is actually one that I really, really like as well, but for different reasons. Now, both of these, they have their pros and cons. Now, Fedica allows you to have up to 9 accounts for free. So this one, you can actually cross-post into LinkedIn, and even, well, on the paid version, you can do TikTok and YouTube, but it also does like PixelFed and a few others. So the great thing that I like about Fedica is that I run my own PixelFed instance, so I can actually cross-post into my PixelFed and Mastodon for the same things, or do a nice mix and match and customize the post. So Fedica is a nice solution as well. Both have their free plans. Both have their paid for versions. Both are great for businesses in their different regards. So do your research on which one is best for your solution. But if you're a content creator posting across multiple platforms, definitely check both out. And I got links in the description for both of them. So while Publer and Fedica have amazing tools for businesses, content creators, and brands that want to make sure they get consistent messaging across the board, like say you get a YouTube video out there, you want to make sure it's scheduled so that it can go across all the different platforms and give you some analytics on the different different things there at various different plans, and I cannot highly recommend them enough. As you have more and more social media, it becomes harder to manage. Trust me, I know. I do find there's a little bit of a limitation when you want to actually interact with your community on these different platforms. So there's a few applications that I personally use so that I can better respond, engage, and all of that after I've made the initial posting. So if you're just a user that wants to focus on like individual apps to get, your responses or posts or stuff like that out, you can use the official Threads and Bluesky apps. I know there's some third-party Bluesky apps out there, but I haven't really seen anything better than that experience right now. That'll probably change over time, so when you're viewing this video, that information may be wrong, and feel free to tell me about the apps that you use down below. But when it comes to Mastodon, there's definitely a plethora of apps that you can use out there that focus just on the Mastodon experience. And the ones that I use on iOS, IceCube's overall my favorite app to manage Mastodon with. It's even better than the Android apps I've seen, but on the Android side, there's Mastodon. IceCube's unfortunately is specific to iOS devices, but I totally hands down say that is my favorite app to use Mastodon on, and I pick up my Samsung all the time, and I'd rather use my iPhone just for the IceCube's experience when it comes to Mastodon. Now, if you're like me though, and you have a community across different platforms, it can be kind of a pain to open up individual apps and then follow up with responses and everything like that. And that's where I have a different set of apps that I use after I do the original posting from, Fedica or Publer. Well, there is Croissant, which is a paid-for app that allows cross-posting, but results may vary. I'm not a big fan of them. The app that I actually use is OpenVibe. OpenVibe currently supports Bluesky and Mastodon, with Thread support coming. They also support Noster, and allows you to cross-post across the different ones, and you can see what the replies and responses are to everything. But it works better with Bluesky because it doesn't work with the federated feed as of this post right now for the video. So I'm still going into IceCubes to discover new things, but I can at least have the interactions going through OpenVibe and see both Bluesky and Mastodon. So definitely a worthwhile app over there. You're probably also wondering, how do you find the accounts that you were following before on Twitter? And there's a few ways you can do this. Now, with Mastodon, there were a few tools I was using called Twitterdon and things like that. Unfortunately, they don't seem to be working anymore because they relied on the Twitter API, and Twitter since made that a violation of the API, which is part of the reason why I don't even work on my tools to work on Twitter anymore. I will be removing Twitter functionality from Twitch and Toot and all the other things I'm doing in the near future. Be that as it may, you can at least, search up Mastodon to see if the accounts exist. Go to the accounts on Twitter. Sometimes they'll mention that they're on Mastodon, things like that. A good website in general to understand Mastodon and the whole of the Fediverse is fedi.tips. Again, I will have this information down in the description. You can also follow different websites, which they also happen to talk about, like fedi.directory, the community trunk, and fediverse.info, so you can find more different people. There's a lot of different ways you have to look at this information. Unfortunately, Twitter broke a lot of the functionality we used to have for tools to automatically find the people we were following before. Or you can, find them on Threads or things like that. Unfortunately, it's a little bit manual. Now, with Bluesky, you may be in luck. There is an extension that seems to be working for Chrome, Firefox, and there's also the Microsoft Edge add-on called Sky Follower Bridge. And you can install that, log into your Twitter account, and then it can see if they're possibly over on Bluesky right now. That is one way that you can definitely find your followers and hopefully rebuild your community over on these new platforms. Now, as of, this post right now, they're still pretty small, so there's a chance that a good amount of people that you were following haven't made the move or made the move yet. Hopefully that changes over time. I would like to see people embrace all these different ecosystems, and it'll be interesting to see how the winds shift. Is Threads going to be where a lot of people stay and, move more towards? Are they going to go more to the Mastodon and Fediverse side of things? Is Bluesky going to capitalize? How are they going to, monetize things and keep things afloat? I'm really interested to see how this is all going to play out. I will say that I definitely am enjoying all three of these platforms more than I am Twitter/X. It's going to be interesting to see what the future holds for all of these. I personally plan to stay on Mastodon and Bluesky for the long term. I mean, I have my own Mastodon server. Bluesky seems interesting to me. Even though I have my complaints about each platform, I'm thinking I'm probably in it for the long haul and don't really see returning to Twitter/X in the near future. And if I do, it'll probably be only in a cross-posting capability using Fedica and or Publer, as I had mentioned before. Eventually, I'd like to move my Threads profile to my Mastodon, as I've mentioned a little bit earlier, if that becomes viable and I can actually take my following on Threads over to there. I'm really excited to see what the future holds for social media and everything, because I really think decentralization and the federated, type of social media is where a lot of things are going. I don't think these monolithic siloed infrastructures and architectures of social media are really going to last much longer in the future. Let me know what you think down below in the comments, and of course, stay safe out there. Happy hacking, everyone.